The cave is warm. Firelight moves across the walls like something alive. You're standing near the entrance, watching. A woman sits between two men. One is tall, narrow, dark-eyed. The other is broader, heavier, pale-skinned, with a strong brow and thick hands. She looks at the broader man, not with fear, not with confusion, with curiosity. Something deeper. Something older than language. She has seen him before, watched him carry meat back to the group, watched him shape stone with a precision that surprised everyone. He is not one of her people. His forehead slopes. His jaw is wider. His voice is deeper, rougher, shaped by a different throat. When he speaks, the words are fewer, but his meaning is clear. He has been watching her too. The tall man notices. He shifts. His body tightens. He does not speak, but his eyes say everything. He has walked beside this woman for months. He assumed she would choose him. Tonight, she does not. She stands. She crosses the fire. She sits beside the broader man. Their shoulders almost touch. The tall man exhales. Something in the cave has changed. Something that will echo for 40,000 years. This is not a love story. This is not a tragedy. This is something stranger. This is the moment two kinds of human beings looked at each other and made a choice that would reshape every generation that followed. You carry the evidence of that choice inside your body right now. If you are of European or Asian descent, roughly 2% of your DNA came from Neanderthals. That is not a theory. That is measured, mapped, confirmed. But here's the paradox that haunts geneticists. Neanderthals disappeared. Their tools vanished. Their caves went silent. Their bones became fossils. They were replaced entirely by people who looked like the tall man by the fire. If they were replaced, how is their DNA still inside us? If they lost, how did part of them survive? If modern humans won, why do we carry the genes of the ones who vanished? The answer is not war. It is not climate. It is not disease alone. The answer may be far more intimate than any of those explanations. The answer may begin with attraction. Think about what that means. Two species, close enough to produce children, drawn to each other across an impossible divide. One species slowly absorbing the other, not through violence, through closeness. But the genetics reveal something even stranger. Neanderthal DNA survives in modern humans primarily through one path. It came through Neanderthal males mating with sapiens females. The reverse pairing, sapiens males with Neanderthal females, left almost no trace. And Neanderthal mitochondrial DNA, the kind passed only from mother to child, is completely absent in living humans. Every Neanderthal mother line is gone, erased, as if it never happened. That means something went wrong, not with the attraction. The attraction clearly worked. Something went wrong with the offspring. Something about the combination of Neanderthal mothers and hybrid children did not survive. This is not a simple extinction story. This is a reproductive mystery. A genetic ghost story written in the code of every person alive today. The Neanderthals did not simply die. They were absorbed, partially. And the parts that survived followed rules we are only beginning to understand. Tonight, we are going to walk through that mystery slowly. We will follow the evidence from frozen caves in Europe to ancient DNA laboratories in Leipzig. We will ask questions most documentaries avoid. What happened when these two kinds of humans met? What drew them together? Why did one kind disappear while the other carried fragments of them forward? And why did the male Neanderthal line vanish so completely? We will look at the genetics. We will look at the bones. We will look at the tools, the campsites, the burial sites. We will look at what the children of these unions might have experienced, caught between two worlds. We will ask whether attraction itself can become a force of extinction, whether desire, closeness, and reproduction can unmake a species more thoroughly than any war or famine ever could. This is the story of the most intimate extinction event in human history. It did not happen in a single battle. It happened in moments like the one you just witnessed. Firelight, silence, a woman choosing. Tonight we explore a possibility few people consider. The disappearance of the Neanderthals may not have begun with conflict. It may not have begun with ice or starvation or disease. It may have begun with attraction. A fatal attraction written not in myths or legends, but in the ancient DNA still coiling quietly inside your cells. The evidence has been waiting for 40,000 years. Let us begin. Chapter 2. Two humans, one species. To understand what happened between Neanderthals and modern humans, you first have to understand how remarkably similar they were. Not similar the way wolves and dogs are similar. Closer than that. Similar the way two distant cousins are similar. They shared a common ancestor. Sometime between 500,000 and 700,000 years ago, a population of early humans split. One branch moved north and west into Europe. The other remained in Africa. Slowly, across millennia, they diverged. The European branch became the Neanderthals. They adapted to cold. Their bodies became shorter, stockier, barrel-chested. Their noses grew wider to warm, frigid air. Their brow ridges thickened. Their muscles became denser. They were built for Ice Age survival. The African branch became us, Homo sapiens. Taller, lighter, with flatter faces and higher foreheads. We developed differently, shaped by different pressures, different landscapes, different climates. But the core blueprint remained shared. When these two populations met again, roughly 50 to 60,000 years ago, they had been separated for hundreds of thousands of years. Yet they could still produce viable offspring. That fact alone tells you how close they remained. In biological terms, this is extraordinary. Most species that separate for that long can no longer interbreed. Their chromosomes drift apart. Their reproductive systems become incompatible. But Neanderthals and sapiens beat those odds. Their biology still recognized each other. This is where the story becomes important. Not just historically, personally, because the children born from those encounters did not vanish. Their genes filtered down through generation after generation. They reached the present. They reached you. If you have ancestry from Europe, Asia, or Oceania, you carry Neanderthal DNA. Roughly 1.5 to 2.4% of your genome came from them. That percentage sounds small. It is not. Spread across the entire non-African human population, that small percentage adds up to a staggering amount of surviving Neanderthal genetic material. Different people carry different fragments. When you combine all those fragments, approximately 40% of the total Neanderthal genome still exists. It exists inside living people, not in fossils, not in museums. In the cells of billions of humans walking the earth today, the Neanderthals are not entirely gone. They were absorbed. Pieces of them live on inside us. Now consider what this means for the traditional extinction story. For decades, the narrative was simple. Modern humans arrived in Europe. They were smarter, more adaptable, better at language. They outcompeted the Neanderthals. The Neanderthals died. End of story. But absorption is not the same as replacement. If Neanderthals were simply replaced, there should be no Neanderthal DNA in modern humans at all. There should be a clean genetic break. Instead, there is blending. This changes everything we thought we knew. The Neanderthals did not simply lose a competition. They participated in something far more complex. They merged, partially, with the species that supposedly defeated them. The question is how. And the answer requires looking at reproduction, not just survival, not just tools or hunting strategies. The intimate, biological reality of two different kinds of humans producing children together. Reproduction between species is never simple. Even when offspring are viable, meaning they survive to birth and beyond. There can be complications, reduced fertility, health problems, immune system conflicts, developmental issues. We see this in other closely related species. Horses and donkeys produce mules, which are almost always sterile. Lions and tigers produce ligers, which often have health problems. Closeness does not guarantee seamless reproduction. For Neanderthals and sapiens, the offspring were clearly viable enough to pass genes forward. But viable does not mean equal. There may have been costs, subtle ones. Costs that accumulated over generations and shaped which genes survived and which did not. This is the heart of the mystery. The interbreeding happened. The genes survived, but they survived unevenly. Certain Neanderthal genes were kept by natural selection because they were useful. Others were ruthlessly purged. Neanderthal genes that helped with immune response survived in high numbers. Genes related to skin and hair adaptation to cold climates also persisted. These were beneficial. They helped sapiens populations adapt to new environments outside Africa. But Neanderthal genes near certain critical regions of the genome were stripped away almost entirely. Regions involved in brain development, regions involved in male fertility, regions on the X chromosome. These areas became deserts of Neanderthal ancestry. Something about those genes did not work well in a sapiens body. Or more precisely, something about those genes did not work well in hybrid offspring. The combination was imperfect. And natural selection noticed. This selective purging tells a story more nuanced than conquest or replacement. It tells a story of partial compatibility. Two species close enough to reproduce, but different enough that the results were complicated. Think of it this way. The attraction was real. The children were real. But the genetic integration was messy, imperfect, and sometimes costly. Over thousands of years, the useful Neanderthal genes were kept. The harmful ones were discarded. This process has a name. It is called introgression. It means the transfer of genetic material from one species into the gene pool of another through repeated backcrossing. It is slow, it is selective, and it reshapes both populations. What makes the Neanderthal case special is the direction. The introgression was overwhelmingly one way. Neanderthal genes flowed into the sapiens population. Very little sapiens DNA has been found flowing back into late Neanderthal populations. This asymmetry is a clue. It suggests that hybrid offspring were being raised primarily within sapiens groups, not Neanderthal ones. The children stayed with their sapiens mothers. They grew up as sapiens. They married sapiens partners. Generation by generation, the Neanderthal contribution was diluted but never erased. And here is the implication that changes the story. If the Neanderthals were contributing genes to the sapiens population but not receiving genes in return, then every act of interbreeding weakened the Neanderthal population. Every child born to a mixed pair who was raised as sapiens was one fewer Neanderthal. The attraction was not mutual destruction. It was one-directional absorption. The sapiens population grew larger and more genetically diverse. The Neanderthal population grew smaller and more genetically isolated. This is the paradox at the center of our story. The very closeness between these two peoples, the very attraction that drew them together, may have been the mechanism that erased one of them from existence. Not through hatred, through intimacy. Not through war, through children. The fatal attraction was not a metaphor. It was a biological process, operating quietly across hundreds of generations. And the most disturbing part of this process involved something specific. Something that shows up clearly in the genetic record. Something that happened to the males. Chapter 3. The Dangerous Experiment of Males. Let us pause here for a moment. Take a breath. Let the fire in that ancient cave settle into embers. Because the next part of this story requires a different kind of attention. It requires us to look at what happened to the sons. when two closely related but genetically distinct species interbreed, the consequences are not equal for male and female offspring. This pattern appears across the animal kingdom. It is so consistent that biologists gave it a name more than a century ago. It is called Haldane's rule, named after the geneticist J.B.S. Haldane, who first described it in 1922. The rule states that when hybrid offspring have problems, it is almost always the heterogametic sex that suffers most. In mammals, the heterogametic sex is the male. Males carry one X chromosome and one Y chromosome. Females carry two X chromosomes. This difference seems small, but in hybrids, it becomes enormous. Here is why. If a hybrid inherits a problematic gene on the X chromosome, a female has a second X chromosome that might compensate. She has a backup copy. A male does not. He has only one X, there is no backup. This means that any genetic incompatibility that shows up on the X chromosome will hit males harder than females. And when you cross two species that have been separated for hundreds of thousands of years, there will be incompatibilities. Now apply Haldane's rule to Neanderthal sapiens hybrids. The prediction is clear. Hybrid males would have suffered more problems than hybrid females: reduced fertility, developmental issues, lower survival rates. The sons would have paid a higher price. And the genetic evidence confirms this prediction with startling precision. The X chromosome in modern humans is almost completely devoid of Neanderthal ancestry. It has been swept clean. Whatever Neanderthal genes once existed on the X chromosome were removed by natural selection. This means hybrid males who had only one X chromosome were at a severe disadvantage. If that single X carried incompatible Neanderthal variants, the consequences were immediate and irreversible. No backup, no compensation, no second chance. The sons born from Neanderthal sapiens unions were the dangerous experiment, not because anyone planned it, not because anyone understood the genetics, but because biology imposes rules that no amount of intention can override. Some of these hybrid sons may have been infertile, unable to produce children of their own. This is exactly what Haldane's rule predicts for the heterogametic sex in hybrid crosses. And infertility is an evolutionary dead end. Others may have been subfertile, capable of reproducing but with reduced success, fewer viable sperm, lower conception rates, higher miscarriage rates among their partners. Subtle disadvantages that, over hundreds of generations, would compound into significant genetic erasure. The daughters, by contrast, had two X chromosomes, one from each parent species. If one carried an incompatible variant, the other could compensate. The daughters were buffered, protected. They survived and reproduced more successfully. This is why Neanderthal DNA survives in modern humans primarily through female-mediated inheritance patterns. The daughters carried the genes forward. The sons, disproportionately, did not. The experiment was dangerous, and the males bore the cost. But there is something even more specific in the genetic record, something that points not just to reduced fertility in hybrid males, but to a particular vulnerability in their reproductive biology. Researchers have found that the regions of the modern human genome most depleted of Neanderthal ancestry are those involved in testicular function. Genes expressed in the testes show dramatically low levels of Neanderthal contribution. This is not subtle. This is a clear signal that hybrid males had problems specifically related to male reproduction. Their testes may not have functioned normally. Their sperm production may have been impaired. Their ability to father children may have been compromised. Imagine being one of these hybrid sons. You look somewhat like your father, the Neanderthal. You are perhaps broader, stronger, with a heavier brow. You are raised in a sapiens group, surrounded by sapiens men who do not look quite like you. You grow up, you reach maturity, you seek a partner. Perhaps you find one, but the children do not come. Or they come rarely. or they do not survive. You do not understand why. No one does. The knowledge does not exist yet, but biology knows. Inside your cells, the two genomes are at war. The Neanderthal genes on your single X chromosome clash with the sapiens genes elsewhere. Your reproductive system stutters. The experiment that created you has limits. This is not a story of cruelty. It is a story of incompatibility at the most fundamental level. Two genomes, separated for 500,000 years, brought back together in a single body, unable to fully cooperate. Now consider the population level effects. Every generation, some hybrid males fail to reproduce. Their Neanderthal genes die with them. Meanwhile, hybrid females reproduce successfully, passing on a diluted but still present Neanderthal contribution. Over time, this creates a filter. Neanderthal genes that are compatible with sapiens biology pass through. Neanderthal genes that cause problems, especially in males, are eliminated. The genome is edited, not by anyone, by the cold mathematics of differential reproduction. This process explains the strange pattern we see today. Neanderthal DNA exists in modern humans, but it is distributed unevenly. It is present in some genomic regions and absent from others. The regions where it is absent are the regions where it caused harm. The X chromosome, the testes expressed genes, the brain development regions. These are the areas where Neanderthal and sapiens biology were most incompatible. And these are the areas where natural selection worked hardest to remove Neanderthal variants. The males were the testing ground, the frontier where two genomes collided and the damage was most visible. The daughters carried the inheritance forward. The sons revealed its cost. This is why the Neanderthal Y chromosome has completely vanished from modern humans. Not a trace remains. The paternal line is extinct. Every Y chromosome on Earth today is a sapiens Y chromosome. The Neanderthal fathers are gone. Their sons could not sustain the line. The fatal attraction was fatal specifically to the male lineage. The women survived genetically. The men did not. And this brings us to a question that changes the entire story. If the male hybrid line was failing, and if Neanderthal populations were small to begin with, how long could the Neanderthal species sustain these losses? The answer is hiding in a genetic bottleneck that no one expected to find. Chapter 4. The bottleneck no one expected. In 2010, a team led by Svante Pääbo at the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology published the first complete Neanderthal genome. It was a landmark achievement. Decades of work, painstaking extraction, revolutionary technology. But when they analyzed the data, something unexpected appeared. The Neanderthal genome showed remarkably low genetic diversity, far lower than modern humans, far lower than what you would expect from a species that had survived for hundreds of thousands of years. This was not a minor finding. Low genetic diversity is a signature of population bottlenecks. It means that at some point, the Neanderthal population shrank dramatically. So few individuals survived that the genetic variety was permanently reduced. Think of it like a library fire. If a library with 1 million books burns down to 100 books, the remaining collection is limited. Even if you copy those 100 books 1,000 times, the variety is gone. That is a bottleneck. For the Neanderthals, the bottleneck was severe. Estimates suggest their effective breeding population may have been as small as a few thousand individuals at various points. Not the total population, the breeding population. The ones actually producing the next generation, a few thousand, across all of Europe and Western Asia, scattered in small bands, separated by mountains, rivers, glaciers, and vast stretches of cold, empty landscape. Each group isolated. Each group vulnerable. Compare this to the sapiens population expanding out of Africa. Their numbers were growing. Their genetic diversity was higher. They had the advantage of larger breeding networks, more partners, more genetic variety to draw from. When these two populations met, the Neanderthals were already fragile, already reduced, already operating at the edge of genetic viability. They did not need a catastrophe to push them toward extinction. They needed only a small, sustained pressure. And interbreeding was exactly that kind of pressure. Every Neanderthal individual who mated with a sapiens partner and produced offspring, raised in the sapiens group, was one fewer contributor to the Neanderthal gene pool. Remember, the hybrids were primarily absorbed into sapiens populations. The gene flow was one-directional. The Neanderthals were losing members. Not to death, to integration, to absorption. To children who grew up speaking sapiens languages, using sapiens tools, living sapiens lives. For a population already numbering in the low thousands, even a small rate of absorption would be devastating. Lose 1 or 2 breeding individuals per generation from each small band, and the math becomes catastrophic over centuries. This is not speculation. Population geneticists have modeled exactly this scenario. Even a very low rate of interbreeding, combined with the larger sapiens population size, leads inevitably to the absorption of the smaller population. The models show that no violence is necessary. No climate disaster, no epidemic. Just 2 populations of different sizes, interbreeding at a low rate, with the offspring joining the larger group. The smaller group disappears. It is mathematical certainty, but the bottleneck added another dimension. Because the Neanderthal population was already genetically impoverished, they were more vulnerable to the harmful effects of inbreeding. Small populations accumulate deleterious mutations. They lose the genetic diversity needed to adapt to changing conditions. The Neanderthal genomes we have sequenced show signs of this. Long runs of homozygosity, which means stretches of DNA where both copies are identical. This happens when your parents are closely related. It is a hallmark of inbreeding. Inbreeding depression reduces fitness. It affects immune function, reproductive success, developmental stability. The very systems that the Neanderthals needed to be functioning at their best were compromised by their small population size. So the Neanderthals faced a 3-pronged assault. First, their population was small and genetically impoverished. Second, interbreeding with sapiens was draining individuals from their gene pool. Third, the hybrid males produced from those encounters were disproportionately infertile. Each of these forces alone might have been survivable. Together, they created a vortex. An extinction vortex where each problem amplified the others. Fewer Neanderthals meant more inbreeding. More inbreeding meant lower fitness. Lower fitness meant fewer successful offspring. Fewer offspring meant an even smaller population. And into this already precarious situation came the sapiens. Numerous, genetically diverse, expanding, adaptable. Not conquering the Neanderthals. Not necessarily even meaning to harm them. Simply being present. Simply being available. Simply being close enough to be attractive. The fatal attraction was not a single event. It was a sustained demographic process. Generation after generation, the two populations interacted. Generation after generation, the Neanderthal numbers declined. Not suddenly. Gradually, like a tide going out so slowly you barely notice until the shore is dry. The genetic record preserves this slow disappearance with haunting precision. Late Neanderthal populations show even lower genetic diversity than earlier ones. The bottleneck was tightening. The vortex was accelerating. The end was approaching. But here is what makes this story more than just a demographic tragedy. Here is what elevates it from population genetics into something genuinely mysterious. Something that should keep you thinking long after this documentary ends. The Neanderthal DNA that survived inside modern humans is not random. It is not a simple cross-section of the Neanderthal genome. It is selected, curated, filtered through thousands of years of natural selection inside sapiens' bodies. Some of those surviving Neanderthal genes gave us advantages. They helped our immune systems recognize new pathogens in European and Asian environments. They helped our skin adapt to lower levels of ultraviolet light. They helped us survive in landscapes the Neanderthals had already mastered. We carry their cold weather adaptations, their immune innovations, their hard-won genetic solutions to problems they spent 300,000 years solving. We inherited the best of what they had learned, written not in language but in DNA, and we discarded the rest. The parts that did not fit, the parts that clashed with our own biology, the male fertility genes, the X chromosome variants, the developmental programs that worked in a Neanderthal body but failed in a hybrid one. This selective inheritance is perhaps the strangest part of the entire story. The Neanderthals are gone, but their most useful innovations live on inside billions of people. They were not simply destroyed. They were harvested, absorbed. Their genetic wisdom was extracted and incorporated. Was this an accident of biology? Or does it reveal something deeper about how evolution works when two closely related species collide? Is absorption always the fate of the smaller population? Is this pattern repeating invisibly in other species even now? These questions matter because they point to a mechanism of extinction that is almost never discussed. Not competition, not violence, not environmental change, but intimacy, closeness, the merging of two populations where one is slowly consumed by the other. And there is one more detail, one more piece of the puzzle that researchers discovered only recently, a detail that changes our understanding of when and how the critical interbreeding events occurred. The Neanderthal DNA in modern humans does not come from many separate interbreeding events spread across tens of thousands of years. It comes primarily from a narrow window of time, a specific period, a single major pulse of interbreeding. This pulse occurred roughly 50 to 60,000 years ago, in the Near East, in the Levant, in the very region where that firelit cave scene at the beginning of our story was set. A single population of sapiens encountered a single population of Neanderthals, and they mixed. That one encounter, that one period of contact, produced the majority of the Neanderthal ancestry found in all non-African humans today. Billions of people, tracing back to one meeting, one place, one time. But what happened during that encounter that made it so consequential? What made this particular meeting different from others? And what happened to the Neanderthal population that participated in it? The answer lies in something geneticists found when they looked more closely at the oldest known hybrid individual, a skeleton discovered in a cave in Romania. A skeleton that would rewrite the timeline of everything we thought we knew. That skeleton is waiting for us, and what it reveals will challenge the very definition of what it means to be human. Chapter 5. When sons failed to continue, picture a boy. He's born in the shadow of a limestone cliff, perhaps 45,000 years ago. His mother is Neanderthal. His father is one of the newcomers, tall and dark-eyed, arrived from the south. The boy looks different from both parents. His brow is softer than his mother's, but heavier than his father's. His shoulders are broad. His jaw is strong. He runs with the other children and no one questions his place. He grows. He hunts. He reaches the age when young men seek partners. But something is wrong. Something invisible. Something no one in his world has the language to name or the knowledge to understand. He never fathers a child. This is not a story preserved in any fossil. No bone can tell you about a man's fertility, but the evidence exists. It is written in your DNA right now. It is written in absences and silences across the human genome. To understand what happened to boys like him, we need to talk about a rule, not a law of physics, not a commandment, a biological pattern observed so consistently across nature that it earned a single man's name. John Burton Sanderson Haldane was a British geneticist of extraordinary range. In 1922, he noticed something peculiar about hybrids. When two closely related species mated, the offspring were not equally affected. One sex suffered more than the other, specifically the heterogametic sex. In mammals, that means males, because males carry one X chromosome and one Y chromosome. Females carry two X chromosomes, providing a backup. Haldane published this observation, and it became known as Haldane's rule. It states that when hybrid offspring show reduced fertility or viability, it is the heterogametic sex that is affected first and most severely. Think about what this means for our boy on the cliff. His sisters, born from the same Neanderthal mother and sapiens father, may have been perfectly fertile. They could bear children. They could pass on their mixed heritage without obstacle. But his biology betrayed him. The mechanism is elegant and cruel. When two species diverge over hundreds of thousands of years, their genomes accumulate incompatibilities, small molecular conflicts, proteins that no longer cooperate, regulatory sequences that contradict each other. These incompatibilities are scattered across every chromosome, that they become most dangerous when there is no backup copy. A hybrid female has two X chromosomes. If one carries a Neanderthal variant that conflicts with a sapiens variant, the other X can compensate. A hybrid male has no such luxury. He has one X and one Y. Every incompatibility on his X chromosome is exposed. Every conflict between Neanderthal and sapiens genes on that chromosome plays out with nothing to soften the damage. The result is not dramatic. He does not die. He does not appear sick. He simply produces fewer viable sperm, perhaps none at all. His body functions normally in every way except the one that matters for continuation. Now here is where the genome of living humans confirms this ancient tragedy. Researchers have mapped Neanderthal ancestry across all human chromosomes. The distribution is not even. Some regions carry more Neanderthal DNA. Some carry almost none. The X chromosome is a desert. Almost no Neanderthal DNA survives on the human X chromosome. This is exactly what you would predict if Haldane's rule operated during hybridization. The X chromosome was the battlefield where incompatibilities were most exposed in hybrid males. Natural selection systematically removed Neanderthal variants from the X chromosome over thousands of years. Every generation that a Neanderthal X variant reduced a male's fertility, that variant became slightly less common. Over millennia, it vanished. This is not speculation. This is one of the strongest signals in the entire ancient DNA record. The pattern has been confirmed by multiple independent research groups using different analytical methods and different reference genomes. It is robust. But think about the human cost. For every statistical data point, there was a real person. A boy who grew into a man who never understood why he had no children. A lineage that ended in silence. His sisters thrived. Their children carried Neanderthal genes forward, but the contribution was filtered. Only what passed through daughters survived intact. The sons were genetic dead ends far more often than chance alone would predict. This created an asymmetry that would shape everything that followed. The mixing of two human species was not a balanced merger. It was a process with a built-in bias. And that bias always favored one side, not through violence, not through conquest, through the quiet arithmetic of chromosomes. You might ask whether this pattern is unique to Neanderthals and sapiens. It is not. Haldane's rule has been documented in birds, insects, fish, and other mammals. It appears to be a nearly universal feature of hybridization. But in most cases, the two species involved are not both human. In most cases, neither species buries its dead or paints cave walls or grieves for children who will never come. This is where the science becomes something else. This is where the science becomes a story about people. Remember the boy on the cliff. He does not know he is part of a pattern. He does not know that 50,000 years from now, scientists will read his absence in the genome like a missing page from a book. He only knows the silence where his children should have been. And that silence is about to get louder. Chapter 6. The one-way current of blood. There is a direction to this story. It flows one way like a river that never reverses. Neanderthal genes moved into the sapiens population. But sapiens genes almost never moved back into Neanderthals. This asymmetry requires an explanation. The simplest explanation is numerical. Sapiens populations were larger, perhaps 5 to 10 times larger than Neanderthal groups in any given region. When a small population meets a large one, the arithmetic of absorption becomes inevitable. Imagine two rivers merging. One is wide and fast. The other is narrow and slow. The water from both rivers moves downstream together, but within a few miles, the smaller river is indistinguishable. Its identity is dissolved. This is what happened to Neanderthal genetic material. It entered the sapiens stream and was diluted. Not destroyed. Diluted. Spread thin across a vast and growing population. Each generation, the proportion shrank slightly. Each generation, the Neanderthal signal faded. The dilution alone does not explain the one-way current. After all, if Neanderthals and sapiens mated regularly, some sapiens genes should have flowed into the Neanderthal population too. The late Neanderthal genomes should show sapiens ancestry. They mostly do not. The Vanishing cave Neanderthals from Croatia, dated to approximately 40,000 years ago, show minimal sapiens ancestry. The Altai Neanderthal from Siberia shows none. The El Sidran individuals from Spain show none. The signal is remarkably clean. One study published in 2018 found a faint trace of early sapiens DNA in a Neanderthal specimen. This suggested a very ancient contact event, perhaps 100,000 years ago. But in the critical final period, the flow was overwhelmingly unidirectional. Why? What mechanism ensured that genes traveled from Neanderthals into sapiens, but not the reverse with any lasting effect? Part of the answer returns to Haldane's rule. If hybrid males were less fertile, then the most successful hybrids were females. These females would seek mates. And here a social question becomes paramount. Where did these hybrid women live? If they lived among sapiens groups, they would mate with sapiens men. Their children would be 3/4 sapiens. Their grandchildren 7/8. Within a few generations, the Neanderthal contribution would be a trace element, a ghost in the code. If hybrid women lived among Neanderthal groups, the reverse would happen. Neanderthal ancestry would be reinforced. Sapiens genes would accumulate, but we see no evidence of this. The late Neanderthals remain genetically Neanderthal almost entirely. This tells us something profound about social structure. Hybrid offspring were predominantly raised in sapiens communities. The mothers may have been Neanderthal women who joined sapiens groups, or sapiens women who mated with Neanderthal men and returned home. Either way, the children grew up sapiens. They learned sapiens languages. They used sapiens tools. They lived in sapiens social networks. And when they chose mates, those mates were sapiens. The one-way current was maintained by culture as much as biology. There is another factor. Population size creates its own gravity. A larger group offers more potential mates, more social connections, more security. A smaller group offers fewer options and greater risk. The pull is always toward the larger population. This is not a human phenomenon alone. Biologists call it genetic swamping. When a rare species hybridizes with an abundant one, the rare species genome is progressively absorbed. Each generation of backcrossing moves the hybrid population closer to the abundant species. For Neanderthals, this was a trap with no exit. Every successful mating with sapiens produced offspring who were more sapiens than Neanderthal. Every generation of backcrossing erased a little more. The current flowed in one direction only. But here is the devastating subtlety. This process did not require hostility. It did not require sapiens to consciously absorb Neanderthals. It did not require anyone to make a decision. It was emergent. It arose from the mathematics of unequal populations meeting. Two groups, one large, one small, attraction between them, fertile daughters, infertile sons, social gravity pulling offspring toward the larger group. These 5 factors together created a one-way valve that could never be reversed. The Neanderthals were not conquered. They were loved into oblivion. Now you might object. Surely some Neanderthal communities resisted this process. Surely some groups maintained their identity for thousands of years. And you would be correct. The process was not instantaneous. It played out over 5,000 to 10,000 years. Some Neanderthal populations in Iberia survived until perhaps 37,000 years ago. Some in the Ural region may have persisted even later. These were refugia, pockets where geography or chance delayed the inevitable. But delayed is not prevented. The current always found them eventually. And here we reach a question that the genome alone cannot answer. What did this feel like from inside? What was it like to be part of a people who were slowly becoming something else? Did they notice? Did they mourn? No fossil preserves an emotion. No gene encodes grief. But consider the mathematics of a population of 3,000 losing even a small percentage of its reproductive females to another group each generation. The compound effect is catastrophic. Within 20 generations, the population halves. Within 40, it is a remnant. Within 60, it exists only as fragments scattered through another people's chromosomes. This is not metaphor. This is population genetics modeled and published in peer-reviewed journals. The one-way current carried everything. Neanderthal immune genes, Neanderthal skin adaptations, Neanderthal keratin proteins, all flowing into the sapiens population. None flowing back. The river never reversed. And it is still flowing now through you. But there is one piece of Neanderthal biology that the current destroyed completely. One element so thoroughly eliminated that its absence is itself a revelation. That element is about to reshape everything you think you know about this story. Chapter 7. The Vanishing Y. The Y chromosome is the smallest human chromosome. It carries roughly 50 to 60 protein-coding genes. It passes from father to son unchanged, except for rare mutations. It is a direct patrilineal record stretching back through deep time. Every man alive today carries a Y chromosome, and not a single one of those Y chromosomes is Neanderthal. Let that settle. Neanderthal DNA persists on chromosome 1, on chromosome 6, on chromosome 12. Fragments of Neanderthal ancestry survive scattered across 22 autosomal chromosomes in varying densities. But the Y chromosome is completely clean. 0 Neanderthal ancestry. 0. This was confirmed in 2016 when researchers finally sequenced a Neanderthal Y chromosome from the El Sidrón cave in Spain. The specimen was 49,000 years old. The results were immediate and stark. The Neanderthal Y chromosome was profoundly different from any modern human Y chromosome. Not subtly different, not ambiguously different. It had diverged to a degree that suggested functional incompatibility with the sapiens' biological system. Specifically, researchers identified mutations in genes involved in immune function on the Neanderthal Y chromosome. One gene coded for a minor histocompatibility antigen. An antigen is a molecule that the immune system can recognize and potentially attack. Here is the devastating implication. If a sapiens woman carried a hybrid male fetus with a Neanderthal Y chromosome, her immune system may have recognized the Y-linked antigens as foreign. Her body may have attacked the pregnancy. Miscarriage. Not every time. Biology is probabilistic, not deterministic, but with elevated frequency. Enough to create a selective disadvantage. Enough to ensure that over generations, the Neanderthal Y chromosome became rarer and rarer in hybrid populations. Combined with Haldane's rule, this was a double punishment for hybrid males. Those who survived to birth faced reduced fertility. Those who were conceived faced elevated risk of never being born at all. The Y chromosome was trapped between two lethal filters. Natural selection does not negotiate. It does not grant exceptions for historical significance. It simply counts the offspring. And Neanderthal Y chromosomes produced fewer offspring than sapiens Y chromosomes in every generation without exception. The elimination was complete, absolute, total. This is not a case of reduced frequency. This is extinction of an entire chromosomal lineage across the entire human species. Billions of men alive today. Not one Neanderthal Y among them. Now add the mitochondrial evidence. Mitochondrial DNA passes from mother to child. Every human alive today carries mitochondrial DNA, and not a single living human carries Neanderthal mitochondrial DNA. Every Neanderthal maternal line is also gone. Think about what this means together. The patrilineal record is erased. The matrilineal record is erased. Only the autosomal fragments survive. The Neanderthal contribution to humanity exists only in the shuffled, anonymous middle of the genome. No direct line survives. No unbroken chain of fathers. No unbroken chain of mothers. Only scattered genes stripped of their context, floating in a sapien sea. The Neanderthals left us pieces of themselves, but no lineage. No name. No continuous thread. This is a particular kind of extinction. The body dies, but the organs are harvested. The language dies, but a few words enter another tongue. The people vanish, but their adaptations persist in strangers who will never know the source. It is absorption so thorough that even the memory is dissolved. But something does not fit. If hybrid males were largely infertile and hybrid pregnancies with Neanderthal Y chromosomes frequently failed, then how did any Neanderthal DNA survive at all? The filters were so strong. The barriers so formidable. The answer is the daughters. Hybrid daughters with their two X chromosomes buffered against incompatibility. Hybrid daughters who face no Y chromosome immune conflict during their own pregnancies. Hybrid daughters who were fertile and strong and carried their Neanderthal heritage forward successfully. Everything that survives of the Neanderthals in your genome was filtered through women. Every adaptive gene. Every immune variant. Every cold weather skin protein. All of it passed through the female line, even though it now resides in men and women equally. The sons were the bottleneck. The daughters were the bridge. This realization transforms the entire narrative. The fatal attraction was not fatal for everyone equally. It killed the Neanderthal Y chromosome. It killed the Neanderthal mitochondrial line. It killed the Neanderthal X chromosome variants. But it preserved everything else. Selectively, ruthlessly, without intention, and without mercy. And here the story takes its darkest turn. Because if you model this process mathematically, starting with a Neanderthal population of a few thousand and a sapiens population of tens of thousands, the timeline to complete absorption is shockingly short. Some models suggest fewer than 100 generations. At 25 years per generation, that is 2,500 years. Others allow for geographic separation and slower contact rates, extending the process to perhaps 5,000 years. Either way, the Neanderthals did not slowly fade across geological time. They were absorbed within a span that a cultural tradition could survive. A grandmother could have told stories about a world before the newcomers arrived. This speed makes the process feel less like evolution and more like an event. A catastrophe measured not in millennia, but in lifetimes. Fast enough to be felt. Slow enough that no single generation saw the full scope of what was happening. The men vanished from the future first. Their Y chromosomes rejected by hybrid biology. Their fertility compromised by chromosomal incompatibility. The women followed as their daughters and granddaughters became indistinguishable from the sapiens majority. And somewhere in a cave in Romania, a skeleton has been waiting for 40,000 years. A skeleton that carries the marks of both worlds in its bones. A skeleton that geneticists have now sequenced and dated and measured. That skeleton is about to tell us exactly when the vanishing began. And the answer is earlier than anyone expected. Because the bones in that Romanian cave do not belong to someone who lived at the end of the Neanderthal story. They belong to someone who lived near the beginning of the encounter. And the percentage of Neanderthal DNA in those bones is so high that it rewrites every model of first contact. The cave is called Pectera-Cu-Oase. The skeleton is known as Oase-2, and what it reveals about the first generation of hybrids will change how you understand every word you have heard so far. Chapter 8. Climate, War, or Desire. The cave at Pectera-Cu-Oase sits in the Carpathian foothills of southwestern Romania. The entrance is narrow. You have to crawl through water to reach the inner chambers. In 2002, cavers found a jawbone resting on the wet stone floor. That jawbone belonged to a young man. He lived approximately 40,000 years ago. When researchers finally extracted and sequenced his DNA in 2015, the results stunned the entire field of human evolution. He carried between 6 and 9% Neanderthal DNA. 6 to 9%. Modern Europeans carry roughly 2%. This young man had 3 to 4 times more Neanderthal ancestry than anyone alive today. The mathematics pointed to a Neanderthal ancestor within his family as recently as 4 to 6 generations back. A great-great-great-grandparent. Perhaps closer. This was not ancient admixture diluted over millennia. This was fresh. This was intimate. This was a family in which Neanderthals and sapiens had been intertwined within living memory of the people who knew him. His name in the literature is Oase-2. His jawbone combines features of both species. The chin is weak by sapien standards. The wisdom teeth are enormous. The overall shape sits uncomfortably between two categories that we thought were distinct and separate. But here is what makes Oase-2 devastating to simple narratives. His lineage did not survive. When geneticists compared his DNA to modern Europeans, they found no special connection. His particular branch of humanity left no living descendants that we can detect today. He was a hybrid. He lived. He died. His line ended. The Neanderthal DNA that survives in modern humans came through other encounters. Other families, other beds shared in other caves on other cold nights across the Near East and beyond. This means absorption was not a single event. It was a pattern repeated across thousands of years and thousands of kilometers. Some hybrid lines thrived. Most did not. The ones that survived carried Neanderthal genes that happened to be useful or at least not harmful. Oase-2 forces us to confront a difficult question. If the earliest hybrids carried so much Neanderthal ancestry, why do we retain so little? The answer requires us to examine the 3 competing explanations for Neanderthal extinction and determine which one actually fits the evidence. The first explanation is climate. Between 40 and 30,000 years ago, Europe experienced dramatic climate oscillations called Heinrich events. Massive armadas of icebergs broke from North Atlantic glaciers and surged southward. Sea temperatures plummeted. Forests retreated. Grasslands turned to frozen steppe. Neanderthals had survived ice ages before. They had endured glacial maximums that pushed them into southern refugia in Iberia, Italy, and the Balkans. They always recovered when conditions improved. They had done this successfully for hundreds of thousands of years without going extinct. But this time was different. This time, another species occupied those same refugia. When the cold pushed Neanderthals south, they encountered sapiens populations that had already established themselves in the warmer zones. The escape routes were blocked not by ice, but by people. Climate alone cannot explain the extinction. The The timing is wrong in several regions. Neanderthals vanished from some areas during relatively mild periods. They persisted in others through harsh conditions. Climate was a pressure, but not the killing blow. Something else determined who survived. The second explanation is violence. Direct competition, warfare. Sapiens possessed projectile weapons, throwing spears and later outlaws that could kill at a distance. Neanderthals were close-range hunters. Their spears were thrusting weapons designed for ambush predation at intimate and dangerous proximity. Some archaeological sites show evidence of trauma on Neanderthal bones, consistent with interpersonal violence. Shanidar Cave in Iraq preserves a Neanderthal skeleton with a projectile wound to the ribs. Saint-Césaire in France shows a Neanderthal skull with a healed blade injury. But widespread evidence of systematic violence between the two species simply does not exist. No battlefields, no mass graves, no layers of burned Neanderthal settlements. If sapiens waged a campaign of extermination across an entire continent over 10,000 years, the archaeological record is strangely silent. Violence was surely part of the story. Two intelligent territorial species competing for the same resources would inevitably clash. But genocide requires sustained organized intent across hundreds of generations. Nothing in the archaeological record supports that scale of coordinated hostility between these populations. The third explanation is demographic. Sapiens simply outbred Neanderthals. Larger populations, faster reproduction, better survival rates for infants. Even a tiny reproductive advantage of 1 or 2% per generation compounds dramatically over thousands of years, until the smaller population mathematically ceases to exist. This is where the story becomes uncomfortable, because demographic replacement does not require hatred. It does not require weapons. It does not even require awareness that anything is happening. It only requires that one group is slightly larger and slightly more fertile than the other. Paul Mellers and Jennifer French published a landmark study in 2011 analyzing site density across the transition period in southwestern France. They found that sapiens populations outnumbered Neanderthals by approximately 10 to 1 based on the number and density of archaeological sites. 10 to 1. Imagine being part of a community of 50 people. Over the next ridge lives a community of 500. They speak differently. They look different. But they are close enough to be attractive, close enough to mate with, close enough to produce children together. What happens next is not war. What happens next is mathematics. And mathematics does not care about courage or intelligence or how much you love your children. Mathematics only counts who has more babies that survive long enough to have babies of their own. Climate set the stage. Violence played a role in specific encounters, but the engine of extinction was demographic. The question remaining is precisely how that demographic engine operated. What were its gears? What was the fuel that made it turn relentlessly for 10,000 years? The answer lives in the mathematics of small populations. And those mathematics are merciless. Chapter 9. The Mathematics of Collapse. In 1930, the American geneticist Sewell Wright described a phenomenon he called genetic drift. In small populations, random chance plays an outsized role in determining which genes survive into the next generation. Beneficial traits can be lost. Harmful traits can become fixed. Randomness overwhelms selection. Wright demonstrated that populations below a certain effective size lose genetic diversity faster than mutation can replace it. They enter a spiral. Less diversity means less ability to adapt. Less ability to adapt means fewer surviving offspring. Fewer offspring means even smaller effective population size. This is called an extinction vortex. Once a population enters it, escape becomes progressively harder with each generation. The vortex tightens. The mathematics are indifferent. They apply equally to endangered pandas, island bird species, and ancient humans living in small bands across glacial Europe. Late Neanderthal genomes tell this story with brutal clarity. The specimen from Vindija Cave in Croatia, dated to approximately 52,000 years ago, shows long runs of homozygosity. Stretches of DNA where both copies of a chromosome are nearly identical inherited from related parents. The Altai Neanderthal from Denisova Cave in Siberia is even more striking. Her parents were closely related, possibly half-siblings. The runs of homozygosity in her genome are among the longest ever recorded in any ancient human specimen from any period or location. El Sidrin in Spain preserves a family group of 13 Neanderthals dated to approximately 49,000 years ago. Genetic analysis revealed they formed an extended family. The adult males were closely related to each other. The females came from different groups, indicating patriarchal social structure. This means Neanderthal women left their birth groups to join their mates. This pattern is common in many primate species, including modern humans. But in very small populations, the available pool of unrelated mates shrinks with each generation. Options narrow. Inbreeding becomes unavoidable eventually. The effective breeding population of late Neanderthals may have been as low as 1,000 to 3,000 individuals across all of Western Eurasia. Not the total census population, which was larger, but the number actually contributing genes to the next generation successfully. For comparison, the effective population size of anatomically modern humans in Africa during the same period was estimated at 10,000 to 30,000, possibly higher. Even the lower estimate gives sapiens a tenfold advantage in the raw genetic diversity that buffers against extinction vortex dynamics. Now add interbreeding to this equation. Every Neanderthal woman who joined the sapiens group removed her reproductive potential from the Neanderthal gene pool permanently. Her children would be raised as sapiens. They would speak a sapiens language. They would marry into sapiens families going forward. Every Neanderthal man who fathered children with a sapiens woman contributed his genes outward, but gained nothing for Neanderthal population stability in return. His hybrid sons, per Haldane's rule, likely suffered reduced fertility. His hybrid daughters were fertile, but socially absorbed into their mother's larger community. This is not a symmetrical exchange. This is a hemorrhage. The smaller population bleeds members into the larger one. The larger population barely notices the addition. A few new faces, a few unusual features, some useful genes for immune function and cold tolerance. Geneticist David Reich and colleagues published models in 2012 showing that even very low rates of interbreeding could drive the smaller population to extinction. If just 2% of Neanderthal individuals per generation mated with sapiens and their children were absorbed, extinction follows inevitably. 2% per generation, 1 person out of 50. One young woman who falls in love with a tall stranger from the other camp. One young man who follows a sapiens band and never returns. That is all it takes when sustained across hundreds of generations. The models predict complete absorption within 100 to 200 generations. At 25 years per generation, that is 2,500 to 5,000 years. The archaeological record shows Neanderthal disappearance occurring over approximately 5 to 10,000 years. The fit is uncomfortably precise. But absorption alone does not explain why modern humans retain only 2% Neanderthal ancestry when early hybrids like Oase2 carried 9%. Something was removing Neanderthal DNA from the sapiens gene pool, even as more Neanderthal DNA was flowing in through continued interbreeding. That something is called purifying selection. And it was operating ruthlessly on every hybrid born into a sapiens community. Their Neanderthal genes were being tested against the sapiens genetic background, and many of those genes were failing the test generation after generation after generation. The discovery published in 2016 by Ann Jurek and colleagues at the University of California, Davis measured the rate of this purging. Neanderthal ancestry in sapiens populations has been declining steadily over the past 40,000 years. It was higher shortly after contact. Immediately after the main hybridization events, sapiens populations may have carried 6 to 10% Neanderthal DNA, consistent with what we see in OACE2. Over subsequent millennia, selection whittled this down. Incompatible genes were eliminated. Neutral genes drifted away. Only advantageous genes were actively retained. The regions of the genome most aggressively purged are those involved in male fertility, brain development, and skeletal growth. Precisely the regions where 200,000 years of separate evolution had produced the greatest divergence between the species. Precisely where incompatibility would be most severe. The regions that retain Neanderthal ancestry tell the opposite story. Immune system genes, particularly the human leukocyte antigen system. Genes affecting skin pigmentation and hair texture, useful for surviving northern UV conditions. Genes influencing fat metabolism in cold climates where caloric efficiency determines survival. Your immune system likely carries substantial Neanderthal contribution. When you fight off an infection, some of the molecular weapons you deploy were inherited from Neanderthal ancestors who spent 300,000 years adapting to European and Asian pathogens that sapiens had never encountered before arriving. This is the paradox of Neanderthal extinction. They vanished as a people, but survive as a presence in our biology. Their population collapsed to zero. Their genetic legacy persists in billions of living humans. They are simultaneously completely extinct and inescapably present inside your cells. The mathematics that destroyed them also preserve fragments of them. The same process of absorption that ended their independent existence carried their most useful adaptations forward into a species that would eventually cover the entire planet. Extinction and survival happen through the same mechanism simultaneously. But we have been circling the central question without stating it plainly. We have discussed climate pressure and demographic models and genetic purging. We have not yet named the force that actually drove individual Neanderthals and sapiens into each other's arms and each other's lives. The mathematics explain how extinction happened. They do not explain why it happened. For that, we must return to the cave, to the firelight, to the fundamental biology of attraction between two species close enough to desire each other and produce viable offspring. Chapter 10. Extinction by Attraction. Here is the revelation that this entire narrative has been building toward. Neanderthals did not go extinct despite being attractive to modern humans. They went extinct because they were attractive to modern humans. Attraction was not incidental to their disappearance. Attraction was the mechanism of their disappearance. This requires careful understanding. We are not talking about a modern concept of romantic love projected onto the deep past. We are talking about biological attraction. The signals that primate bodies use to identify viable mates: symmetry, health indicators, strength, novelty, immune, compatibility detected through scent. The major histocompatibility complex determines part of your individual scent profile. Research shows humans preferentially find attractive the scent of individuals whose immune genes differ from their own. This preference exists because offspring with diverse immune genes survive disease better than offspring with as homogeneous immune systems. Neanderthals and sapiens had been separated for 500,000 years. Their immune systems had diverged substantially. When they encountered each other, the MHC difference between them would have registered as intensely attractive at the most basic olfactory level of mate assessment. You would have smelled a Neanderthal and found something compelling in it, not despite the difference, but because of the difference. Your body's ancient mate selection machinery would have identified that unfamiliar scent as a signal of immune diversity beneficial for potential offspring survival. This is not poetry. This is immunogenetics. And it means that the very biological system designed to help you choose the best possible mate was actively drawing sapiens toward Neanderthals and Neanderthals toward sapiens. The bridge between the species was built by evolution itself, operating as intended. But attraction alone does not produce extinction. Attraction, combined with asymmetry, produces extinction. And the asymmetry was profound. Sapiens outnumbered Neanderthals by perhaps 10 to 1. Sapiens groups were larger. Sapiens social networks were wider. Sapiens camps were where the resources and safety concentrated. When a Neanderthal woman found a sapiens man attractive and joined his group, she entered a larger community. Her children had more potential mates, more protection, more social support, more food security through broader trade and alliance networks. The pull was gravitational and rational simultaneously. When a sapiens woman found a Neanderthal man attractive and bore his child, she likely stayed in her own larger group. The child grew up sapiens. The Neanderthal father may have joined her community or returned to his own. Either way, the child was socially sapiens. In every scenario, the net flow of people and genes moved from the smaller population into the larger one. Not because anyone intended harm. Not because anyone understood the demographic consequences. Simply because individual humans made individual choices that felt right and natural in the moment. A young Neanderthal woman sees a sapiens camp with 80 people. Her own band has 15. 8 of them are close relatives. The sapiens camp has more hearths, more laughter, more young people her age, more potential partners who do not share her grandmother's face. She crosses the valley. She is welcomed or at least tolerated. She is exotic and interesting. She brings skills. She knows where the ibex shelter in winter. She knows which plants reduce fever. She is valuable. She is desired. She stays. She has children. Her children are hybrids. Her daughters are fully fertile. Her sons may struggle with reduced fertility per Haldane's rule, but some reproduce successfully. Her grandchildren are 3/4 sapiens. By the 4th generation, her descendants are indistinguishable from the broader sapiens community around them. Absorption is complete. Back in her birth group, her absence is felt. One fewer woman of childbearing age. One fewer pair of hands for processing hides. One fewer voice around the fire. The group was already small. Losing even one reproductive female accelerates the decline toward the extinction vortex threshold. Multiply this scenario across 10,000 years. Across thousands of encounter points from the Levant to Iberia to the edges of the Central Asian steppe. It does not require every generation to lose members. It requires only a slow, steady trickle, a few individuals per century. The geneticist Armando Neves and colleagues modeled this process using realistic population parameters published in 2012. With Neanderthal populations of 10,000 and sapiens populations of 50,000, even trivially small rates of interbreeding produce complete Neanderthal absorption within 4,000 years exactly. No war required, no plague required, no climate catastrophe required. Just 2 closely related species sharing the same landscape, finding each other attractive for perfectly sound biological reasons. And the smaller group slowly dissolving into the larger one like a stream entering a river. This is the fatal attraction. Fatal not because attraction is dangerous in itself. Fatal because when the attracted populations are unequal in size, attraction becomes a one-way current that the smaller population cannot survive. Every act of love is an act of demographic erosion. The Neanderthals who lived through this process never knew it was happening. No individual experienced extinction. Each person experienced only their own life, their own choices, their own loves. The woman who chose the sapiens man was not committing species suicide. She was simply choosing a mate. Extinction happened in the aggregate, in the mathematics that no one could see, in the slow generational arithmetic that converted Neanderthal persons into Neanderthal percentages. From a people to a trace. From a civilization that lasted 300,000 years to fragments of DNA in your chromosomes. The last Neanderthals may have lived in the caves of southern Iberia around 37,000 years ago. Perhaps a few persisted in isolated pockets of the Urals or the Caucasus even later. Small bands, aging bands, bands where everyone was related and the young had already left. They did not know they were the last. They knew only that the world had fewer faces they recognized, that the camps they visited now spoke unfamiliar words, that their children's children looked different from the grandparents who held them, that something was changing beyond the power of memory. And then one day a final individual died, not in battle, not in catastrophe, perhaps in sleep, perhaps by a dying fire in a limestone cave while snow fell outside and no one remained to notice the silence that followed. An entire branch of humanity ended without witness. But it did not truly end, because in that same century, thousands of people across Europe and Asia carried fragments of Neanderthal biology inside every cell of their bodies. They fought infections with Neanderthal immune genes. They survived winters with Neanderthal metabolic adaptations. They lived because Neanderthals had lived. The fatal attraction killed the Neanderthals as a people, but it preserved them as a presence. The desire that drew two species together destroyed one of them as an independent lineage and simultaneously ensured that its biological legacy would persist for at least another 40,000 years. This is what the cave painting never shows. Not the mammoth hunt, not the ritual burial, not the hand pressed against stone in red ochre. What it never shows is the quiet afternoon when a woman from one world looked at a man from another and chose. That choice, repeated 10,000 times across 100 centuries, is the true story of Neanderthal extinction. Not a catastrophe, not a genocide, a love story. The saddest love story ever told. Because it was real, and it worked, and it cost an entire species its existence. You carry their inheritance. Between 1.5% and 2.5% of your genome, if you have any ancestry outside of sub-Saharan Africa, came from Neanderthal ancestors who lived and loved and vanished from the earth thousands of centuries before you were born. When your immune system fights a novel pathogen, Neanderthal genes may be part of your defense. When your skin responds to low winter sunlight, Neanderthal adaptations may govern that response. They are not separate from you. They are woven into the biological fabric of what you are. The fatal attraction thesis asks a question that has no comfortable answer. Is this survival or is this extinction? If your genes persist in billions of bodies, but your language, your culture, your identity, and your face have vanished entirely, are you still alive in any meaningful sense? We do not know what the Neanderthals called themselves. We do not know their word for love. We do not know what songs they sang to their children or what stories they told around fires that burned in caves we have not yet discovered. We know only that they were close enough to us to be desired, close enough to produce children, and that this closeness, this biological intimacy, this fatal attraction, was precisely what ensured they would not survive as a people separate from our own expanding, restless species. The next time you look in a mirror, consider what looks back. Not purely sapiens, not anymore. Something more complex. Something that carries within it the genetic memory of an encounter that began in firelight and ended in silence. A merger written in base pairs and bone. This story is not over. New caves are being excavated. New genomes are being sequenced. New mathematical models are being built. Every year, the picture sharpens and what emerges is stranger and more intimate and more human than anything we previously imagined about our deep evolutionary past. If this journey into the deep past moved you, if it changed how you think about what it means to be human, subscribe to our channel. Share this with someone who wonders about the lives that came before ours. Because the story of who we are begins with who we loved.